Hello and welcome to this tutorial where I'll be showing you how to generate your final rig from your proxies that you've set up on your model. I'm just going to work with a quadruped this time. I've shown you how to use a biped mainly for the tutorials, but here's an actual 3D model of a tiger where I can now set up proxies and skin, and this is one of the big benefits of the modular system, is being able to do things like quadrupeds. So I've gone in and I've set it up so the character has 4 legs, tail. I've added also some ears with FK controls or FK chains, and this is all based off of the quadruped preset. And I've positioned the center of gravity or the cog for the proxy, and I've also added some toe controls as well, just for the toes in here, so that I can get some more dexterity in when he's running around or whatever I want to do with this character. And so once I'm happy with all my proxies, I'm going to go over to generate rig, and I can give this a name. So I'm going to call this tiger rig. Now this has to be a unique name from anything else you have in your scene, and it will warn you if it's not. And then so once I'm at this point, I'll simply hit generate modular rig. And this will take anywhere from a few seconds to maybe a few minutes, depending on the complexity of your rig. This one isn't too complex, so it should only take maybe 30 seconds tops. And then once it reaches that point where it's generated all the rigs, all the joints and controls and the hierarchy, you'll get this option here, which says, do you wish to generate a single hierarchy joint set? So this is pretty much the only time you want to use this if you're working in a game environment. And in my case I'm not, so I'm just going to hit no. If you hit yes, you can also create a joint at the origin if you need like sort of like a trajectory type of a bone. But for now I'm just going to choose no. So I get my joints here and all my controls, and Rapid Rig, it doesn't know the size of your character, like whether he's got big limbs or what you're using each proxy for, because they're fairly flexible for using for anything you want. So you can see some of these things probably don't fit as well as they could. Like for example, these ones are quite large, but if this was something else that, like a bigger, thicker tail, then that size might be a good default. So what we could do is actually go in and start resizing and moving some of these controls around once you're happy with your rig. If something's not right and you want to go back, like delete your rig and restart, you can go to the Extras tab and delete your proxies or delete your rig. So in this case I could delete my rig, go back, adjust my proxies, generate it again. But I'm pretty happy with how this is for now. I may want to experiment with it, see how it goes, do some deformation tests, and then go back to that step and then just touch it up wherever I need. So now that I'm happy with my setup, I can go in and we'll just resize some of these controls. So for example, the tail here, these controls here are all quite large, and I can go in and I can either do it to select it, I could do it to the whole branch, I could do all my controls, and I also have an option to mirror. So if I have controls a left side and a right side, I can do both at the same time. And then below that I have uniform scale, so I can specify whether I want it to be on all 3 axes, or I could specify which axis or axes individually. So in this case I'm mostly concerned with the height. So if I were to go into my scale tool or move tool even, just make sure you're on local or object depending on the tool settings, so you know which direction it's going, because these are pointed down the joints typically. So you can see X is pointed backwards, whereas it should normally point out to the right. But again, if you're familiar with rigging at all, you'll know that you need local axes for controls and joints. So what I could do is maybe just scale these on the y-axis. So I'll turn off the Z and X and maybe go 0.5. And there we go, that's not bad. And then maybe I'll do a uniform scale and just shrink it down a little bit more, so I'll maybe scale it down by a factor of 0.75. There we go, that's not bad. It should be easy enough to select and it's not in the way. And then the next thing I can do is go in and maybe resize these spline controls. So maybe let's see what 0.5 looks like for those. Yeah, that's not bad. I can also go into vertex mode and move these around. If you're unfamiliar, I can hit like F9 on my keyboard. And then I can grab these and move them manually But for simple scaling, this works pretty well. So what else? Maybe I can make these ones a little bigger. Just turn off my mesh for now on joints so it's easier to select the controls for now. So yeah, I'll grab these ones here and this one as well. Maybe we'll scale these up by 1.5. There we go. That should be a little better. This one could even go a little bit more, perhaps. There, something like that. Not bad. And then the feet, those look a little small. So maybe I'll just double those in size. That might be a bit much, so maybe we'll go a little bit less. Yeah, that's alright. And then just quickly do these guys here in the front and these ones here in the back. So these are your foot kind of pivots on the toe and heel. Okay. Yeah, so I'm pretty happy with that. That should be a good starting point. I can always go back and make more tweaks. So what I'm going to do is just go through each of the different modules that make this guy up. The only one he's missing is the arms, but the arms are fairly similar to the legs, so it shouldn't be too bad. And before I do that, I'm going to skin the character. So when you're ready to skin your character, typically right as soon as you generate your rig, this will fill in with the same name here. But let's say you've closed this window and you come back. And I go to generate my rig and I want to select my skinning joints. I need to actually define what rig I want to skin from. So what I could do is simply select the main control here and load the rig, so it knows which skinning joints, because you may have multiple characters in your scene or whatever. So now that I've defined which character I want to grab the joints from, I'll simply hit select skinning joints, and then I'll shift select the geometry, and I'm going to go to skin, bind skin, smooth bind. Now this assumes you have a bit of knowledge of binding characters. The rigging tools don't do anything special for doing the skinning, so you still have to paint your weights, but it does get the bulk of the work of actually creating the rig done for you. And one new feature with later versions of Maya is the option for heat weight mapping for your skinning method. This is really great for most rigs, in fact. Basically it's doing some sort of projects out from the bones to find out where it should influence. So this fixes a lot of problems that can happen with areas under the arms, which would typically get more influence from even the elbow. So it's a much better skinning method. It'll save you a lot of time right out of the gate for skinning. But anyways, what I want to do is skin to selected joints. And I'll choose heat weight, classic linear. This is what you want to choose for most rigs, in particular rapid rigs. The reason why you don't want to use dual quaternion, and weighted blending is just basically a way of painting between the two. Dual quaternion has an issue with joint scaling, where it will really stretch the mesh out in weird ways. So if you're doing any sort of joint scaling, which Rapid Rig does, if you want to use the single hierarchy joint chain, you could probably get away with using dual quaternion. But then again, if you're using that one, it's probably for a game engine, and that might not support dual quaternion skin weighting anyways. So it's probably safest to just stick with classic linear. And interactive is best. Weight distribution, distance is probably good. And then the rest of this should be all right. And so now that I'm good with that, you can colorize or not, and I'll just go bind skin. Alright, so now the character is bound, and I can go in and paint my weights, improving some of the areas of deformation, which there will be some areas that will need some help for sure. I'm going to go and turn off all the extra bits, just because I'm not too concerned with those for now. And we'll just worry about just going through all the different aspects of the rig. So this is the root control here. Actually, we'll start it with the main control. So what this one allows you to do is move your character anywhere in your view. It's fully scalable in any axis you want. You just have to be careful because some stuff might go a little bit beyond what you would expect if you're not doing non-uniform scale, but you are allowed to do that. It will let you do that. And also in there is the option for the cog control visibility. So this is off by default. You could turn it on. And then what this is sort of the center of gravity of your entire character. So it will move the whole thing around, and of course it's not going to affect anything that has IK. And I'll just turn this off for now, just because it's kind of in the way. I'm not really too concerned with that, but it is there if you so desire. So what we have here now is the root control. So every character will have a root, the root joint in it, and it will have these three controls. So there's the root control, which will, effectively rotate the whole character. There's also the root secondary. Now what this one is good for is if you have a character with hips, for example, and you can see I can move this around and it moves the backside of the tiger without you moving the front side, whereas if I grab this it moves the whole one. And the reason why it does this, that it knows to affect the legs, is the legs enable a certain option by default. Now we probably want to turn that on for the tail, but if you look at the legs, I have this option here where I have root secondary or root. So currently it's set to root secondary, which is this one here. If I want, I can swap this to the root and you'll see the difference. So now when I move this one, only the one leg moves with it, and then the other leg moves with this one. So I'm going to switch this back to root secondary. And then for the tail, so every time you have any sort of FK chain, you get a master control. And the reason you get a master control is you may have something like in the toes here where there are several chains at once, and you need there are some global settings that you'll want to adjust, and rather than having that on only one of those controls or several, there's a master control. So I'm just going to set this to root secondary, and now you can see that if I move this, the tail goes with the root secondary control instead, and then they both still move with the root control. And on top of that is something that's not visible right now, but there's a parent control, and I could turn that on. And what this is just one more layer of control. So I could, twist my character over this way and then being able to rotate along that new axis. So this becomes helpful if you run into like gimbal lock issues, or you just want another layer of control at the root level. Alright, so the next thing we'll talk about is the spline. So splines, again, are typically used for necks and spines and maybe tails if you want. I just went with an FK tail in this case. But in the spline, I'm going to start with the top IK control. So the spline is sort of a FK-IK hybrid. So there's these FK controls here, which work like FK. If I rotate one, it affects everything down the chain. So if I were to grab all of these at once, we get like the additive effect of FK. Same with if I add this one and rotate it, so it's additive effect. However, layered underneath that, or on top of it I guess, is an IK system. So the FK affects the IK, and then I can go in and do the spline IK manipulation to the character, and these ones still affect on top of that. So it's sort of an additive effect. I'll just undo that, get him back to his normal pose here. And I'll just go through some of the settings here. So we have our translate, rotate, scales, typical stuff. And then we also have a top orient, and each module will have something like this. And what this does is if I turn this off, whenever I move, my parent of that node around, it'll move with it. But if I rotate it, you can see that this one is not moving with it, with this top orient. Sorry, there's also a parent orient, which is a little bit different, but I'll just undo this. So if I rotate these ones here, you can see how the spline, or the spline top IK control is not rotating with it, and that's just the top orient. So if you want it to move with the top one, you can. If you don't, you can just leave that off, and you can key it on and off. So if you want to have his head, stay locked kind of in position, or his neck locked in position, no matter what his lower body is doing, you can see the head will always stay looking forward. Just undo that. Alright, so that's the top orient, and then follow FK control. What this does is, this is a spline system at the base level. However, we could tell these joints to follow the FK controls like explicitly. So, for example, if I go and I rotate these, you can see that these joints will slightly shift off of the center pivot. So you can see this isn't sitting exactly on top of the joint, on top of the control. And that's because it's sort of doing a blend. So you can see, especially if I were to pull this away, you can see how these come way off of their controls. So what I can do is I can tell them to stay with the FK controls. So if I say follow FK, now this stays exactly with the FK control. So again, if you want something less cartoony, then that might be the better option for you. Alright, continuing on. So we talked about the root parent, so splines, anything that's attached to the root will have this. So if I were to switch this to root secondary, now this one will affect it as well. But it doesn't give me as much control by having that one affect it. I probably want to keep this one on the root, and that way I can affect the hips separate. I'll turn off follow FK, so we get like a nice blend. So we can either kind of get the spline effect on the top side or the bottom, you know, whichever one you want, or both, probably at certain points. And continuing on, the next one we have is the parent orient. So each module will be attached to a parent node, whether it's the root or, you know, in the case of the neck being attached to the spline, same with the front legs being attached to the spline. There's this parent orient, and maybe I'll explain this with the tail. It's probably easier to see. So right now, if I rotate this and move it around, you can see how the tail follows that. Now, what I may want is to have, you know, I want to be able to have the tail follow, but when I rotate it, I don't want the tail to inherit any of that rotation. So what I can do is in the tail, turn off parent orient down to 0. So what this will do is anywhere I move the hips, you can see it's still attached, but the rotation doesn't affect it. Again, this is great if you want to have it like, you know, look at one thing and stay locked but move with its parent. Especially if you're doing anything like robotic or that sort of thing where you want to have like really mechanical looking like straight orient, or maybe even like a chicken head where the chicken's head stays locked in one place while the body can rotate around. The next one on the spline is the auto volume. So one thing you may notice is if I pull this away, you can see it gets a lot thinner in the middle here. Now things are kind of pulling apart, but you can see how thin he gets. So it's like he's maintaining the volume as he stretches, right? As if, you know, if you grab like an elastic band, it gets thinner as you stretch it apart, and it's the same sort of idea here. And that's doing an auto volume, so it's auto scaling the joints to make them thinner as the spline gets longer. I can actually turn that off. So now if I stretch him out, he doesn't get thinner in the middle. So if you're looking for just subtlety with your squash and stretch, you may want to limit that amount. So you can do anywhere between 0 and 1. I'll leave it at 1. The spline curve is just fairly subtle. It's just a slight variation on how the curve is calculated on the spline. So you see it's pretty subtle there. It'd have to be moved into more extremes for it to really notice, but it is there. And then, so we do have control over, you know, the top and bottom of the spline. We have the FK controls. We also have a middle spline control, so I can shift him around in the middle. And then there are also individual controls for each joint. So if I select this, the spline top IK control, I can turn this on. And now you can see there's these controls for each individual spine joint, which are layered. Again, this is another layer on top. So if I were to rotate, you know, the body and pull it around, I can still go in and manipulate each joint into like a specific location if I want. So you can get some really refined looking, arcs in the form of the character, or however you want to pose him. And that's pretty much it for the spline. The next one we'll look at is let's look at the legs next. So in the legs, this is actually like a dog leg style where there's 2 knees. So we have a hip control, and then we have an upper knee and a lower knee, or lower leg in this case. We have the knee and then the lower leg. And then we also have the foot control, and we have a heel control and a toe control. And then this last one is the switch control. So this controls some of the overall, it's sort of like the parent or master control, where you can switch between IK and FK, do auto volume, and the parent orientation stuff as well. So just to do as brief of an overview as possible, try to keep this video from getting too long, I can go in and pull this around, and you can see that as I slide this along, this other control here, this lower leg IK control, will automatically sort of angle based on the amount of movement here. So if I don't want it to automatically angle like that, I can go into this one and turn off auto orient. So now it's much more stiff and rigid. So wherever I pull his foot around, you can see it staying locked there. So it's less natural, but as an animator you can do like your own custom animation on there. It's just meant to like save you some of the work. I'll just undo that back and put this back at 0. And then we also have this is the knee IK control. So if you're familiar with Rapid Rig Advanced, this works very much the same way, where I can point the knee anywhere I want. And then there are also follow options. So right now it stays in the same location regardless of where I move, the foot or the hip. But what I can do is I can change the setting on this to either follow the ankle, the hip, or the ankle and the hip. So if I put it on ankle and hip, it'll do sort of an average between the two. So now if his foot comes forward, it's sort of staying in front a bit better, and it allows you to not have to like constantly be animating this thing around. I mean, you will need to animate it if you want to bring the knee out a little bit, or whatever. But now that it's set between those, it'll sort of stay. And if I rotate the foot out, you can see it rotates out. If I want to just have it move with the hip, so if it's with the main control, you can see if I start moving the whole body forward, that control can end up behind the character, and then his knee's going to pop to the other side, which we probably don't want. So we can have it follow the hip, so it'll always stay kind of in front, or even just the ankle itself, and then it will take on everything from, oops, I think I grabbed the wrong one that time. There you go. So now it completely follows whatever the ankle does. So again, personal preference, whatever you want to do. The next thing down on, so yeah, we'll just go through the foot IK control settings. So we have scale, stretch, knee lock, leg scale, foot tilt, ball up down, toe up down, ball swivel, heel ball, and then the last two are for the amount of influence from which control we want to use. So start at the top here. So scale X, I can go in and adjust the scale of these controls. It doesn't actually do anything other than allows us to resize it. But the stretch is really important. So if I go and pull his leg down, you can see the foot is trying to reach where this is going, but it kind of maxes out. So what I can do is turn on stretch, and then it will try to reach that foot, and there we go. The next one we have is knee lock. So if I turn this on, wherever the knee is, it's going to lock to it. And you see we're getting some stretching here just because the weights need to be painted better. But where this comes in handy is if you needed to have his knee locked to the floor or something, and you wanted to have him sort of pivot around that. And I'll turn off the, set that back to main. So now if I move this around, you see like the knee stays locked to the ground. So if for whatever reason you want to have his knee locked to a certain location in space, you could do that. So even if I put it up into something a little more natural there, you can see that knee is going to stay in that position. Again, probably not something you'll use all the time, but it is there. Let's turn that off. And then leg scale is just a way of actually scaling the whole leg out, so I can make it bigger, smaller. And this is useful if you're getting into like IK popping. You could increase the scale a little bit, just so you know it doesn't lock up like that. You could also use the hip control. You know, when it's locked, just bring that down as well. Again, it's sort of a natural, not a real thing, but if it looks prettier that way to get rid of your IK popping, you can do that. Foot tilt. So this one, based on where we positioned our proxies on the side of the foot for the tilts, we can rock the foot from one side to the other. And then ball up, down. So I can make the ball of his foot go up and down. Just zero this guy back out. There we go. And we have toe up, down. Just zero this back out just for now, easier to explain. Toe up, down. Ball swivel, so we can pivot on the ball of the foot. Heel to ball. Again, this needs some weights painted, but just for simplicity's sake, we can kind of see what that's doing. Oh yeah, and then so what this control does is if I'm moving the body around, I can go in and turn this value on, and then it will follow, even though it's IK, it'll follow the parent, so I can still move it around in IK. So this could be handy for, you know, if you're having a character jump through the air and doing a spin, and you don't have to switch it out of FK, you can simply turn that on, and then it will follow whatever the route is. So that's the IK controls. So I'll go through the FK controls of the leg as well. So I'll just simply switch this to FK. And so now I have, you know, the hip as well, which I can move, rotate. All this into place. So again, whichever way you prefer. So if you was, you know, swimming or something, then you may want to do an FK animation. That way, it looks, you get your arcs a little nicer that way. And that's pretty much it for the leg. So again, you have your switching between IK and FK. And with the stretch, there's also, so I can stretch the leg out. Actually, with just pull this down and then turn on stretch. So you see that the leg gets thinner as I move it around. And we can also turn off the auto volume here as well. So this works just like the spline does. So now it stays the same thickness. So you may want to turn this, you know, use this value if you only want a little bit of stretch without having it look like the leg gets thinner, for example. Alright, so the next thing we'll talk about are FK controls. So I've created just an FK spline here. There's really not too much to explain here. You can key these, rotate them all together individually. However, if you have more than one chain, so this is a single chain with several joints, But if we look down here, it's a little hard to tell because there's quite a few joints going on here. I'll just turn off the body. So I have these different chains. So I have several chains, and what you can actually do is do an auto spread. So if I move either of the end ones around, so this is chain 1, this is chain 4. If I rotate those around, it doesn't affect anything else unless I go into the master control here, which is this guy here, and I turn on auto spread. And what this will do is you can see that these other ones will average out over that spline, and same with if I move it away. So if I pull this away, you can see they average between the two. So this can be really useful for things like wings, or I don't know, use your imagination, all sorts of different things. I'm sure you could come up with a use of that, but it seemed like a pretty worthwhile feature to add. You may not want to use it when you're doing something like this, but you may. I don't know. You decide. It's there for you if you want to try it out. So that's pretty much it for FK. Not a lot there. Moving right along, turn the body back on. We have, I guess the head would be the next one. So in the head, there's really not a lot going on here. There's, you know, a head joint, and then really the only other options are the jaw. So when you create your head, you have the option to create a jaw. So I can go in and rotate this around. Now I haven't done any weight painting, so you know it's pulling on the face, but you know it's pretty simple, and I can translate it down as well. Position that, and so when you're trying to move the head, you actually have to rotate whatever its parent is. So this is actually the neck top IK control, and that's what you would do to manipulate the head. And then the very last one is the look-ats. So when you create look-ats, there's one slight difference with this one. For all the other module types, there's no central control when you're mirroring. So you know the legs, there's no controls that they share together. However, with the eyes, or the look-ats, I should say, there is a main look-at control which would pull both sides. Now you can see it's affecting the head. Again, I haven't done any weighting, but you can kind of see what's happening here. So I can move the main one around, and then there are the controls that sit underneath it. So there's a left eye control and a right eye control. And then the other thing to note with this is with the look at, so if I were to go and rotate his head, you can see that the eyes, or the look-ats, move with the head. So it's sort of like his eyes are just locked into his head. We can also set this to turn off local space. So now if his head rotates, you can have his head turning away, but trying to look at whatever the target is. So normally what you do is not have the look-at joints affect the mesh, and then you'd have separate eyeballs which are controlled by those. And that's pretty much it for controlling the character. The last thing I want to mention is there are overrides for colors of your controls. So you may run into a situation, let's turn off my joints where all we're looking at is controls, and this might be a little more useful to see, but for example here I have several controls for the feet, or for the different toes. And I'm just going to make these a little bit easier to grab. So maybe I'll just scale these only on the y-axis. There we go. So now those are a little easier to grab. Now you may run into a problem where they're just too close together and you can't really tell which ones are which. So if I wanted to, I could start going in and I'll make this one a little bigger yet. There we go, now it's sticking out. So I could change these to a different color altogether. So maybe I could make each toe like a different set of colors so that they'd be easier to select. right? So if you have like a lot of layered controls and you just need to differentiate between them, or you don't like the colors that I've specified, you can go in and change them to any of the default ones that are available inside of Maya. And if you ever want to get all of these back to whatever their default was, like you're not sure, it's like, oh, I changed these colors, I don't really like that, I just want to start over, you can just go in and select whatever controls you want and hit D for default, and then that will turn them all back to whatever their default color should be. Okay, I think that's about it for this tutorial. If you have any questions, feel free to get in touch with me. It is a much more complicated system than Rapid Rig Advanced, so I do look forward to hearing from you, and I'll try to answer your questions as best I can. Thanks for watching and enjoy.